Welcome to my channel. I am Cassie. I am behind Hooking Hijinks, and I'm also Abstract Halo 13 on Twitch and Abstract Halo on TikTok. This is my video pattern for the berries and cream shawl. This is just a tiny sample of it. This has a repeat, so you'll make it as big as you want. You'll repeat rows 4 through 13 until you're happy with your size, and then you'll do the border. I go over some of the things you need, but gauge is not important, and this is honestly my favorite thing I've ever created. So I hope you enjoy making this, and I would suggest just kind of watching through the video first before you start, because there are some intricate stitches in this. But this is the berries and cream shawl, and I hope you enjoy making it. And welcome to this tutorial for the berries and cream shawl. As you saw in the example, I'm only going to do one repeat of this to show you guys, but I'm going to go over a few things before we get started. The yarn you use does not matter. I'm going to be using leftover scrap yarn from Karen Big Cakes that I've just wound into one giant ball. So the colors aren't going to be very cohesive. You need 500 yards or more of your yarn of choosing. If you use a worsted weight yarn like a Karen Big Cake, which is what I've used, I would suggest going up 2 millimeters from the suggested hook size. So for my worsted weight yarn, if you guys can see it, I'm using a 7 millimeter hook instead of a 5 millimeter. I did the shawl using the Universe Halloween Twister yarn from Hobby, which is a 3-weight yarn, and I used a J hook, which is a 6 millimeter hook, and it gave me a really nice drape. The point of this is there's no gauge. You can use any yarn. You can, as long as your hook size is about 2 to 3 sizes bigger than what is suggested. You'll also need some stitch markers. I suggest using about 4, 2 of the same color for the ends of your rows. I'm not going to use them in the example, but if you have issues finding your first starting stitch of each row, they're good to have. And then I use 2 contrasting colors. This one will be used to just hold my place if I need to step away from the project for whatever reason. My stitches won't come undone. And then this one will be for the point of the shawl. So there's going to be a chain space at the bottom of each shawl or at each row where it comes to a point like this. I put a stitch marker in there so I can find it. I use a different stitch marker color than the one I use to hold my stitches. You will need a pair of scissors to cut your yarn, a tapestry needle of your choosing to weave in your ends, and a hook. So some stitches and techniques you'll need to know are how to chain. You'll need to know how to do a double crochet, a single crochet. You'll need to know how to do a slip stitch. You need to know how to skip stitch, what that looks like in a pattern, half double crochet. You'll need to know how to work in the 3rd loop of a half double crochet and a front loop of a half double crochet. And when we get to those rows, I will explain and show. You'll need to know how to do front post double crochet and back post double crochet. I will also show how to do those. And you'll need to know how to do an extended puff stitch. And I will show exactly how to do an extended puff stitch, but the post crochets and the puff stitch and the 3rd and front loop are also on my TikTok, which is at Abstract Halo without the 13, so just this. So you can go find tutorials there to download and use. A few other things to keep in mind. The chains at the start of each row will count as a stitch. You will always turn at the start of each row. Stitch markers, like I said, will help if they're placed in the chain space at the middle of each row and at the end of the rows to help you find your last stitch. Gauge does not matter, since this can be worked in any yarn into any size you desire, as this has a repeat. The border is 1 row around the triangle and then 1 row on the top of the rough edge just to finish it off. When you're doing the last row across the top of the shawl, you may want to work your starting tail into the stitches just so you don't have to weave it in earlier or later. So then, to get started, you're going to do a magic circle. This is how I prefer to do my magic circles, is cross it over, turn it, and then twist this underneath. You go under like this, pull it up, and do this. There's probably an easier way, but that's how I learned. So you're going to chain 2, This is row 1, and you're going to double crochet 8 times into the circle. If you do not know how to do a magic circle, you can easily do 4 chains and connect with a slip stitch and just 8 double crochet into, or 9 double crochet into the stitch, into the circle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, 8. That's it. 8. So then you're going to take your tail and you're going to pull your magic circle closed. If you're doing the chain force trick, you don't need to. And then you will not join with a slip stitch to make a circle. You will be working in rows, so you have no need to do that. So then what you're going to do is turn, and then start row 2. You're going to chain 2, and then you're going to DC 1 time into that first stitch. So that means you'll have your chain counts as a stitch, and then your first DC counts as a second. Then you're going to DC 1 time into the next 3 stitches. 2, 1, 2, 3. You're going to chain 2. Then you're going to DC into the next 3 stitches, which will take you to your last stitch remaining. And then you're going to DC twice into that starting stitch of your row. So it should look like this. And this is where you can take your stitch marker and stick it into the point of your row. So that is row 2. Start row 3, you're going to turn, you're going to chain 2, you're going to half double crochet into that first stitch, and then you're going to half double crochet into each stitch until you get to that chain 2 space. And once you get to that chain 2 space, you can take your stitch marker out because you know where you're at. You're going to half double crochet twice into that chain 2 space. You're going to chain 2. Then you're going to half double crochet 2 more times into that chain space. So 1, 2. Take your stitch marker, pop it in. Then you can half double crochet until you get to the last stitch in the row. And I'm having some issues here. We'll just do that. So you'll do that until you reach the last stitch of the row, which will be your chain stitch from the row before. And then you're going to half double crochet 2 times into that last stitch. You'll find that you're going to do a lot of 2 in the ends and in the point. That's the end of row 3. And so we're going to move on to row 4. We're going to turn, we're going to chain 1, and that does count as our first single crochet. Then we're going to single crochet into that first stitch. And so now we're going to work in the front loop of the 3rd stitch. It'll be notated as FLO. So you'll see, I'll use my scissors to point this out. There's this loop, and then a loop back here. You're going to work into this loop right here. So it's in the front of the stitch. It's kind of like a bar crossed. You're going to single crochet into that loop all the way until you reach the chain 2 space. So you're just going to single crochet into that bar. And this row is row 4. Row 4 is the start of your repeat. So you will do this row to start your repeat until you get to your desired size as your last repeat. So in, and then once you're at that chain 2 space, you're going to single crochet twice into the chain 2 space. This is where the stitch marker is really helpful. And you're going to chain 2, single crochet into that chain space twice again. Put your stitch marker back in. And then you're going to single crochet in that front loop until you reach your last stitch. So you're going to just keep doing this until you get to that last stitch in the row. And once you get into the hang of it, it'll be easier to find. Depending on your tension, it'll be a little bit harder to find that front loop, but it should be pretty easy to find. So once you're in your last stitch, you're going to single crochet twice into that stitch. And if you have issues finding your first stitch, this is where putting some stitch markers in would be helpful. So that's the end of row 4, which is the first row of the repeat. For row 5, you're going to turn, you're going to chain 2, and you're going to DC 1 time into that first stitch. And then you're going to DC once in each stitch until you reach the chain 2 space. Once you've reached the chain 2 space from the row before, and take your stitch marker out, and you're going to double crochet twice into that space. You'll see where this is going. This will become a very familiar part of the pattern. You're going to chain 2, and then you're going to double crochet twice into the chain 2 space. So there should be 4 double crochets and 2 chains in your chain space. Then you put your stitch marker in, and then you're going to double crochet into each stitch until you reach your last stitch. So you'll just keep going. Just like this. Until you reach your last chain or your last stitch in the row. Sorry, words are very difficult today. Once you reach that stitch, you're going to double crochet twice into that stitch. Might be noticing a trend with how we do this. And so that's the end of row 5, and that's what it should look like. If you look right here carefully, you'll see like a little V stitch going down. That is what the working in the front loop will do to the yarn and to the pattern. So for row 6, you're going to turn. You're going to chain 2. You're going to double crochet into that first stitch. And now you're going to front post double crochet into your next stitch. And then you're going to back post double crochet into the stitch after that. So to do a front post double crochet, you yarn over. It's just like doing a double crochet, it's just a different placement. You go behind the post of the stitch pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. To do a back post, same way, you're going to do a double crochet, but you're going to go in front of the post. You're going to pull up your yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So again, post stitches are just placements. So you just front post. You'll see my colors changing here. And then back post. And you're going to repeat those 2 until you get to the chain 2 space. And I'll just keep doing it to show you guys. So you're just repeating it. And remember, post stitches are just about the placement of the stitch. So front post is, you go behind, you're pulling the post to the front, and for back post, you're going behind. You'll have 1 stitch remaining after you repeat that, and then you're going to front post double crochet around that 1 stitch. So you'll basically go front post, back post, front post, back post until you have 1 stitch remaining before the chain 2 space. Then you're going to front post around that. You're going to take out your stitch marker. You're going to double crochet twice into your chain 2 space. Then you're going to chain 2. Double crochet 2 more times into that chain space. Replace your stitch marker, and then you're going to repeat that pattern. You're going to front post and then back post. And you're going to do that all the way down until you get to your last 2 stitches. So you're going to front post double crochet around that second to last stitch. Then you're going to double crochet twice into your last stitch, and that is the end of row 6. To start row 7, you're going to turn, you're going to chain 2, you're going to double crochet into that first stitch, and then you're going to back post double crochet now first, and then front post double crochet. So then you're going to repeat back post, front post. And what this will create a nice little basket weave. You're going to do that until you get to the chain 2 space. So it will be an even repeat. Okay, so now that I'm at the chain 2 space, I'm going to take out my stitch marker, and just like the row before, you're going to do 2 double crochet into the chain space. You're going to chain 2, and then 2 more double crochet into the chain space. And then now, you're not going to do the same start as you did for the beginning of this row. For the second half of the row, you're going to start with a front post double crochet. So you're going to start with a front post double crochet. So that way your last stitch before your point are both the same. And then you're going to back post double crochet. And then front post double crochet. You're going to do this until you get to the last stitch, and then we'll meet back there. Once you get to the end, you'll have back post double crochet, and then you're going to double crochet 2 times into that last stitch. And that's the end of row 7, and that's what it would look like for you. So for row 8, you're going to turn, you're going to chain 2, and this row was pretty straightforward. You're going to half double crochet into your first stitch, and then you're just going to half double crochet into each stitch until you get to the chain 2 space. So just going to half double crochet right down the side. Once you're at the chain 2 space, you can take your stitch marker out. You're going to half double crochet twice into the stitch. Then you're going to chain 2. And then you're going to half double crochet 2 more times into that chain space. And then you're going to just half double crochet again in each stitch all the way until you get to your last stitch of the row. So just half double crochet straight down in each stitch. Once you're into that last stitch, you're just going to half double crochet twice into it. And then I forgot to put my stitch marker into my chain 2 space, so I'll do that now. And that's the end of row 8, and this is what it should look like. To start row 9, you're going to turn, you're going to chain 2, and now you're going to half double crochet into that first stitch. And now you're going to work in the third loop, which is, we talked about this before, but there's this front loop here, then there's this loop here, and then there's this loop in the back. So I will put my scissors through it to show you. So through this loop in the back, that is the third loop. So you're going to work half double crochet into the third loop like this. And you're just going to do that all the way until you reach your chain 2 space. So into that third loop, and what it'll do is it'll do the same as that front loop. It'll pull it up and make those V stitches. And so I'll meet you when we get to the chain 2 space. Once you reach your chain 2 space, you're going to take your stitch marker out. You're going to do 2 half double crochets into that stitch, chain 2, and then 2 half double crochets into that stitch again, or that space, excuse me. And then you're just going to go back to doing half double crochet in the third loop, and you're going to do that all the way until you get to your last stitch. When you get to your last stitch, you're going to half double crochet twice into that stitch. So you're just going to do that. And that's the end of row 9, and it should look like this. So you should have a ridge here, a ridge up here, and your little weave pattern. So for row 10 is going to be a special stitch. So you're going to turn, you're going to chain 3. So this is going to count as a double crochet plus a chain. Then you're going to do an extended puff stitch into the first stitch. So I'm going to show you how to do that. You're going to yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and you're going to yarn over. You're going to pull through all of the loops except for your last one. So you have 2 loops remaining. You're going to yarn over and pull through 2. So then you're going to chain 1. You're going to skip a stitch. So you're not going to go into this one. And then you're going to go into this one. And you're going to yarn over and pull up a loop. Yarn over, go in, pull up a loop, yarn over, go in, pull up a loop. And then you're going to yarn over and pull through all of them except for that last one on your hook. So you have 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And you're going to chain 1. You're going to skip a stitch. So you're going to yarn over into the stitch, pull the loop, yarn over into the stitch, pull the loop, yarn over into the stitch, pull the loop, yarn over, pull through all but the last, yarn over, pull through 2. And then you're just going to chain 1 after that and skip a stitch. So then I'll do it at a faster speed. And then you're going to chain. So you're going to keep doing that. You're going to do your extended puffs, chain 1, skip a stitch, and you're just going to keep doing that until you reach your chain 2 space at the point. Okay, so I've got to where I'm doing my last extended puff before the chain space. I'm going to do my extended puff stitch. I'm going to chain one, and then I'm going to work into this chain space. And this is going to be a little different than the corners before. I'm going to do an extended puff stitch into the chain 2 space. I'm going to chain 3, so 1, 2, 3. I'm going to yarn over, go in, and I'm going to do extended puff stitch. And then I'm going to chain 1, I'm going to skip a stitch, and then I'm going to do an extended puff stitch, chain 1, I'll put my stitch marker in, and then I'm just going to skip a stitch and do the same repeat until you get to the last stitch, and then I'll show you how to do that. So you're just going to do your extended puff, skip a chain 1, skip a stitch, extended puff, chain 1, skip a stitch, and you're just going to do this until you get to that last stitch. Okay, so I did my last puff stitch and my chain 1 before the last stitch. What you're going to do is you're going to go into that last stitch and you're going to do an extended puff stitch. You're going to chain 1 and you're going to double crochet into that same stitch. And that should be what the end of row 10 looks like. So just as a note, rows 11 and 12 are exactly the same, but I'm going to show you both of them. So to start row 11, you turn, you chain 3, and you're going to extended puff stitch right into this first stitch. You're going to chain 1, and then you're going to go into this chain space that was created, and you're going to do an extended puff stitch. You're going to chain 1, and now you're just going to work extended puff stitches into the chain 1 space from the row before. So you're just going to work your extended puff stitches like this, chain 1, and you're going to do it all the way until you reach your chain 3 space. So that's what you're going to do. So I am going to show you the last chain 1 space before the chain 3 space. So you're just going to do your extended puff stitch into that chain 1 space. You're going to chain 1, and then you're going to do an extended puff stitch into the chain 3 stitch. And then you're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3. You're going to work another extended puff stitch into the chain 3 space. Then you're going to chain 1. Then you're going to work your next stitch into the next chain 1 space. So then extended puff, chain 1. You can put your stitch marker back into your point. And then you're just going to do that until you get to the last stitch, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so I've got 1 chain space left before the last 2 chain spaces. So I'm going to puff stitch into that, extended puff stitch into it. I'm going to chain 1. Now I've got this chain space, so I'm going to extended puff into that chain space. Chain 1. And now into this last stitch, I'm going to extended puff stitch. chain 1, and then I'm going to double crochet into that stitch. And that's the end of row 11. So it should have like a nice checkerboard with the puff stitches. To start row 12, now row 12 is exactly the same as row 11, but I'll show you guys how to start it, and then I'll show you the last stitch of row 12. I will not show you the point. Like I said, it's exactly the same as the last row. So you're going to chain 3. You're going to extended puff stitch into that first stitch. Then you're going to chain 1. And then you're going to extended puff stitch into this chain 1 space. You're going to chain 1, and then you're going to work extended puff stitches like the last row into the chain 1 space. So you're just going to repeat that all the way until you get to your corner. Your corner is going to be extended puff, chain 3, extended puff, chain 1, and then back into your chain 1 spaces. I'll show you the last stitch of the second side. Okay, so now I've got 2 chain spaces left on row 12. I'm going to do my extended puff stitch, chain 1, and then I'm going to extended puff stitch into the chain space here. Chain 1, then we're going to, I'm just going to do another extended puff stitch into that last stitch. Chain 1, double crochet. So after row 12, this is what it should look like. You should have 3 rows of extended puff stitches, a chain 3 space at the bottom here, and then 2 double crochets on each end. Row 13, so this is the last row of the repeat. When you're done with row 13, you're going to jump back to row 4 to do the repeat, and you're just going to repeat row 4 through 13 until you reach your desired size. I'm not going to do another repeat. I'm going to just jump right into the border. So to do row 13, you're going to chain 2. You're going to half double crochet into that first stitch, and then you're going to half double crochet twice into the chain 1 spaces. So you're going to skip the puff stitch, and you're just going to half double crochet 2 times into each chain 1 space from the row before. So just half double crochet right into those chain 1 spaces, and you're going to do that until you reach the chain 3 space at the end. Now that I'm at the chain 3 space, I'm going to take the stitch marker out. I'm going to half double crochet twice into that space. I'm going to chain 2, and then I'm going to half double crochet 2 more times into that space. Then I'm going to take my stitch marker and put it into that chain space. And then to continue the row, I'm just going to work 2 half double crochets into each chain 1 space from the row before. I'm going to do that until I reach the end and I have 1 stitch remaining. And I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so now I have 2 chain 1 spaces remaining. I'm going to do 2 half double crochets, and then I'm going to do 2 half double crochets, and then you can do 2 more half double crochets in the last stitch. And that's the end of row 13, and this is what it should look like. So you should have just a nice even row. And now we're going to move on to the border. If you will continue to do rows 4 through 13 until you get the size you want. And then once you get to row 13 for your desired size, we're going to start, you'll move into the border. So to do the border, you're going to turn, you're going to chain 2, and we're going to work in the front loop again. So you're actually going to skip your first stitch. You're going to double crochet into this next front loop only. Then you're going to go back into that skipped stitch and you're going to double crochet. So then you're going to skip a stitch, working front loop only. You're going to double crochet. Then you're going to go back into that stitch you just skipped and do a double crochet. So again, you're going to skip a stitch, front loop only, double crochet, and then you're going to go back into your skip stitch, do another double crochet. What this is going to do is create a nice little crisscross effect, and you're going to do that until you get to your point. So once you get to your chain 2 space, we'll come back and I'll show you how to do that. Once you get to the point, what you're going to do is you're going to take your stitch marker out, and you actually don't need it anymore. You're going to double crochet twice into the chain 2 space. You're going to chain 2, and then you're going to double crochet 2 more times into that chain 2 space. Then you're going to start your crisscross again. So you're going to skip a stitch. You're going to double crochet front loop only. And then you're going to go back into your skip stitch front loop only. And this first one can be very hard to find. There it is. You're going to double crochet. And then again, skip a stitch, front loop only, double crochet. Go back into your skip stitch on the front loop only. And double crochet. You're going to do that until you get to your last stitch. So here's the last little bit of the first row of the border. So I'm just going to continue to do my double crochets and going back and double crocheting into my skip stitch as I have been. And then I'm going to have front loop here, and then into the skipped, and now there's 1 stitch remaining. I'm just going to double crochet once into that stitch, and then that is what the end of the first row of the border should look like. So then you're not actually going to turn for this. You're just going to half double crochet. You don't have to chain or anything. This is the last bit of the border. And you're just going to half double crochet kind of evenly across the top. So just space them evenly. It doesn't have to be, you know, a certain way. When you're working, you may find it easier to just kind of work right over your tail from your beginning. And then you'll just keep going. So you'll work half double crochets evenly across the top row until you get to the other corner. So once you get towards the end, you just continue to work your half double crochets evenly, and then you'll join with a slip stitch. You can cut off your ends and weave them in here. I'm going to not do that just because I'm going to pull this out so I can keep using the yarn for other tutorials. But then you'll turn it over. The side with the ridges is the side that should be facing out. That is the right side. And this is what your finished shawl would look like, but just much bigger. So you have a nice little crisscross border, little puff stitches, and a little bit of weave action. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can find me around the internet at my link tree below. I stream on Twitch at Abstract Halo 13. I'm on TikTok at Abstract Halo, and you can find me on Ko-fi, Ravelry, Ribblr at Hooking Hijinks. You can buy a PDF of this pattern that also has a few extra notes and stuff at Ribblr, Ko-fi, and Ravelry, and I'll have those all in my link tree below. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I can't wait to see your creations.